Hi, my name is Adrienne Potter and I'm a CVA. I'm excited to share some things I've learned about driving interactivity when presenting to audiences with you. I'm an alum of the Presenters Bootcamp, and I've co presented in a live academy and a workshop at MAVA's DEI conference previously. I also co founded Alive's Animal Welfare COP, and I've presented several times for the COP for those studying for their CVA exam. The Presenters Bootcamp, though, was the highlight of my experience with Alive because I learned so much that I have used. And I'm excited to share some of what I've learned with you. So, we're going to just speak really briefly about how adults learn and then discuss how to keep adult learners engaged through polls and animations. We'll talk about the power of pictures over words and then do a brief recap. So, how do adults learn? And in particular, how do they learn virtually? The first thing to know about adults is that you have to hook them. Adults need to be engaged in a training or a meeting within the first 5 minutes. And engaged doesn't mean being talked to, it more often means being asked to do something or being asked a question. Adults also need to feel like what you're sharing with them is relevant to their life or their work. Even if your topic is really interesting, if the learners don't think it will apply to them, they're more likely to tune out. And that's what we don't want to happen. And also know that adult learners are more likely to face distractions, particularly when the learning is happening virtually. When you're learning in person, it's pretty rude to whip out your phone and start looking at something. But when you're learning virtually, it's easier to open up another tab or go off camera and start washing your dishes. Knowing this, it's extra important for us as presenters to keep learners engaged in order to keep their attention. So now we'll talk about polls and animations, which are two great techniques for keeping our learners engaged. Start off with, why should we use polls? Polls help us as the presenter to gauge what learners already know, what they want to know about our topic, and how they're feeling. Further into the presentation, polls help us gauge how relevant the information is to learners and if they're retaining that information. Polls can also help learners gauge where other learners are. Start using polls early in the presentation and use them throughout the presentation to chunk up the information that you are sharing with them. And frequency of the polls may depend on what you're sharing and how formal the presentation is. So, how do you decide what platform is best for your learners to use when you're thinking about polls or engagement techniques? Know first that polls do not have to be a yes or a no question. They can be word clouds like the one I'm showing here, knowledge checks, vibe checks, reactions. Engagement tools can be very simple or they can be very complex. When you're deciding which platform to use, think about what your learners may be familiar with and how comfortable they may be with different engagement tools. Some of the more intermediate and advanced tools might be best for learners who are coming for a longer series, say a 3 part webinar. If you're doing a 15-minute information session and you don't know who is attending, you may want to select an engagement option that is a bit more basic. And it should go without saying that you should only select an engagement tool that you're comfortable using and that you're able to use fluently and test out ahead of time. Here's a chart of engagement tools for learners. It goes from simple to intermediate to more advanced. Few things you'll want to think about before getting an engagement tool is how much time you have for the presentation, how much time you have to explain how to use these tools, and whether or not you have someone who is troubleshooting for you. If you're presenting and you have someone in the producer role, that person can assist a learner with getting access to a mural board or a Miro board. But if you're presenting solo or your producer is sharing the slides, you or they may not have the bandwidth to troubleshoot with learners in the moment. If a learner is going to struggle to access the engagement tools, they may get overwhelmed or disappointed and their attention may drop. You'll note that some of these tools are pretty basic, like asking learners to write an answer in the chat or asking them to use reactions. There are some great built in engagement features on Zoom and Teams, including a word cloud now available in Teams. Just so you know, Teams and Zoom are constantly adding new audience engagement features. So before you go out to look to purchase a subscription to something like Mentimeter or Miro or Jamboard or any of the higher level tools, the features that you like may already exist on the tools that you have. So now we're going to move on to animations. And you probably see me using animations throughout this presentation. Animations are great because they allow me as the presenter to stay on the same slide while providing interactivity for you as the learner. Animations are also commonly used to help shape the flow of information that we're sharing and express its meaning. And they are helpful, particularly for sharing more detailed or advanced information. If we're sharing a complex chart, it makes sense to roll that information out slowly rather than share the whole chart with learners and possibly overwhelm them. That's called fire hosing, when we share a ton of information with learners and overwhelm them. When people are overwhelmed, they're more likely to tune out. Best advice I can give you about using animations is to make sure that you preview and practice your animations before you present live. This will help you find out if there are any hiccups in the way that you're sharing information and make sure that the right information goes out first. If someone else is sharing your screen, you'll want to ensure that you guys are in sync. So make sure they know that animations are present and that you practice when to share the information ahead of time. I recommend going through the presentation with animations at least one or two times with your co-presenter. So I'm going to share a little bit about the power of pictures also and how to use pictures with words in your slide. As noted before, your learners are very possibly dealing with distractions, particularly during virtual presentations. So using language that is simple is highly recommended. And I encourage you to look up the plain language style guide if this is something you want to learn more about. The more that your audience has to grapple with what you're saying, the less likely they are to stay tuned in and learn what you are hoping to learn. Pictures and icons can be a really key part of your narrative. Most people learn best when there's a picture and narration rather than a picture, narration, and text. When we have all three of those, it can overload our brains and actually hinder learning. But we want to be sensitive to different people's learning styles. Some people do learn best when there are more words. And for them, you can offer supplemental documents or a supplemental book to go along with the learning materials so that your screen doesn't have a ton of text, but you are able to honor their learning style. So, as a recap, first thing you'll want to do when you begin a presentation is hook your audience through relevant content. And you'll want to keep your audience engaged through polls, animation, and a narrative that has minimal text. If you take one thing away today, it's to make certain that you practice everything at least once you're going to share ahead of time so that your presentation is smooth, polished, and professional. Thank you so much for listening, and it was a pleasure to share this information with you.